Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Prognard. I am your host, Jacob Williams. So, I'm finally getting around to doing a strategy video on a game that I really enjoy and is probably one of my favorite games of all time. But I'm doing this video with a bit of hesitation because I feel that Catan has been around for, 20 plus years now, and I know that I may not be adding much to the community. Moreover, I think that community opinion is very strong. So, out of all my videos that I've thought trolls might come along and poo-poo what I'm doing, I feel that this video has the highest chance of that. So, I don't know. I'm doing this video because I enjoy the game and I think that I have some value to add to the conversation, and I think some viewers will get a lot out of this. So here it is. Let me just put out there before I get started that some of the things I'm going to discuss here are just some strategies and some advice. There's lots of different ways, to win this game, or lots of different strategies. So, do what works for you. This is just meant as a jumping off point for people who may have just learned about the game, or it probably have played one or two games, and they're trying to take their game to the next level. That's really the audience here. People who've been playing it for the full 20 years that it's been out. Maybe you don't get so much out of this video, but hopefully you'll find it entertaining anyway. So, like I usually do in some of these more elaborate strategy videos, I've come up with a list of talking points, and I break down my strategy into two basic categories: a wood-clay strategy and an ore-wheat strategy. And I have some strength, weaknesses, and areas of flexibility. But before I do that, I think before you can talk about any Catan strategy, we first have to talk about two dice probabilities, okay? And to do that, I've printed up this visual aid here. And let me see if I can zoom in on it. Let me look at this, get the camera a little bit better. Let's take a look at this little matrix that I've made. What's a better way to get this in frame? There we go. Alright, so let's take a look at this. What I tried to do here is I tried to make a heat chart on the two dice probabilities. And when I say two dice, I mean we're rolling two six-sided dice, adding them together to get the result. All right, and what I've tried to do is I've tried to show how numbers closest to 7, because 7 is what they call the mean or the expected value, or it's going to be the number that comes up the most. I tried to show it in red, but my printer didn't really print this orange out, but numbers close to the mean, which is 7, are going to be rolled more often. And rolling a 7 has a 6 in 36 probability, or 1/6, or 17%. That's going to be your result that comes up the most. So if you ever feel like the robber is being activated a lot, well, 1 in 6 rolls should activate the robber, generally speaking. And a chart like this could even help you come up with the probabilities of getting different things. So the 6s and the 8s were supposed to be orange, and the 7 was supposed to be red. And then the idea is as you get closer to purple, the lower the probability of rolling dice is. All right. And also, to help along with this discussion, I've kind of made a bar chart here that also shows the probabilities. And I've got 6, 7, and 8 in red because those are the numbers that are rolled most often. And then I've tried to break this down into standard deviations, the way you would see a normal distribution, but it's a little hard to do with a discrete distribution. So I just kind of did it in kind of groups of 2, with 4, 5, and 9 and 10 in yellow. So still kind of combining my heat chart with a traditional histogram. And don't worry about those math terms. You don't really need anything. I think the 2 dice probability is pretty understood by most people, and I think these visual aids will help you out. And if anyone wants, they can email me at the channel, and I can get them some sort of chart like this if they feel that they need it for their games of Catan. So now that we know a little bit, problems with my zoom there. So now that we know a little bit about 2 dice probabilities, and I've showed you some stuff with some charts, and the main takeaway from those charts is numbers closer to 7 are rolled more often, and then as you get into lower, as you start moving further away from 7, the probabilities start getting lower. All right. So now, how does this transition into our review? Transition into my strategy guide. Well, I feel there's 2 basic strategies to this game, and I've kind of got them labeled 2 different ways. But let me say that the 2 basic ones are you're either expanding your number base or you're capitalizing on the variance in the distribution. Well, what do I mean by expanding your number base? Let me get some pieces out here. And by the way, in case anyone's wondering, this is a copy of the 15th anniversary Settlers of Catan that comes in the wooden box and has the bigger buildings. This is a city meeple. This is a settlement meeple. But anyway, got this for Christmas from my wife one year, and I think it looks better on video. I do have the 10th anniversary, but that's the 3D resin version. However, a lot of people have told me that their eyes get distracted looking at the details of the components, and it just doesn't make. It would be too good looking for camera, if that makes sense. All right, so what do I mean by an expanding your number base strategy? Well, generally speaking, what it means is if I have a piece there on 8, 10, 12, it means that I'm trying to build in such a way that I add numbers to my number base. So in this situation, and let me put a settlement there to make it a little more realistic. So in this situation, I went from having 3 numbers in my number base to now having 5 numbers in my number base. Okay, now why is that important? Well, the idea is that the more numbers you have, the more likely you're to produce at least something on every single turn. Okay, so if we kind of go back to my probability chart, if you imagine this blank, right, and you had your own marker, something to color it in, well, you could color in 7 because generally speaking, and in like 99% of cases, you will gain a resource when you roll a 7, okay? You don't technically produce it off the board, but by taking the robber and putting it somewhere, you're taking a resource. So that's kind of why I consider, like, if you had a blank one of these charts, you can just color in 7, and automatically you're having a 1 in 6 chance of producing something, okay? But let's say you have an 8, a 10, and a 12. Well, then you could color in all of these 8s, you could color in all the 10s, and you could color in the 12, right? And so now all of a sudden, you go from having 1 in 6 of getting a resource to, was that 6, 11, 14, 15. So now 50% of the time you're producing resources, okay? And ideally with an expansion type strategy, you keep on expanding, and then now when you do something like this, you've now added 3 and 5 to your number base, and now you're getting closer to every single time the dice are being rolled, you're producing something, okay? So that's kind of the idea behind the expanding numbers base, or what I'm going to also kind of refer to as your wood clay strategy, okay? And I'll get more into that here in a second. Let me kind of clear some of this off the board. And the other main strategy that I'm going to be talking about is what I like to call capitalizing on a variance strategy, okay? And then this would involve having something, or let me switch to cities, something like this, where you don't necessarily have a lot of pieces and you don't necessarily have hot numbers, but when your numbers do come up, you're collecting a lot of resources for that, okay? So not getting as many resources as often, but when you do get them, you're hitting it big. Maybe you can even think of this as a lottery strategy, okay? And that's what I'm going to be referring to as my capitalize on variance, or the or wheat strategy. And just as a heads up, I'll probably refer to brick and clay interchangeably, or ore and stone somewhat interchangeably, so just kind of bear with me as I do that. And then the one last thing I will say that's critical about this game from the very start is that you really need a fair set of dice, okay? This came with these wooden dice, and I feel that wooden dice have a tendency to be more unfair as compared to plastic dice or any other type of material. I think that the wood densities sometimes aren't uniformed, and there could be like little small air pockets that just cause these to be off. I have found that the set of dice in this particular copy tend to roll a lot of 3s and 4s. It's kind of a gut feeling. I don't think it's as normally distributed as it should be. So I think it's critical that you have a set of precision dice. These are upper deck gravity dice, and they come in this milled out aluminum case with magnets, so they seal magnetically. And then these are supposed to be perfectly balanced aircraft grade aluminum dice. And one of the ways allegedly that you can tell that they're balanced is that you can stand them up on their edge. And this may be hard to do because, okay, there we go. That stood up on its edge. And it's supposed to prove that they're perfectly balanced, but whatever. I think it's critical to have fair dice, so that way no one can say that they're being hosed by imperfect dice rolls. Anyway, aside complete. So, talking about the wood clay strategy, let's talk about the strengths of the wood clay strategy. And let me roughly set that up again. Just, again, to kind of give you an idea of how this would work. And I know you love seeing precious airtime burned on setting pieces up. Okay, so this might be some expanding base strategy. What are some of the strengths of this strategy? Okay, well, you're going to have a higher probability of collecting resources when dice are rolled. Okay, that's kind of what I set up this intro with. Getting more numbers means you're increasing your probability of getting things. It's let me grab my chart. It's filling in more boxes and giving you higher probability of getting things. All right, so that's one of its strengths. Another strength is that it's more resilient to the robber because you're diversified, okay? So let's say someone wants to, let's say you're in the lead and someone really wants to punish you with the robber. They could take the robber and go there. And that sucks that you lose your 9 that you have 2 houses on, or 2 settlements on. But you didn't get shut out completely because you still have a 9 over there. And you still have another wheat production. And granted, it's on a 12, which is only a 1 in 36 chance of happening. But you're not completely shut out of producing what you may or may not need. Okay? So that's another strength of the wood clay strategy. It's also easier to compete for longest road, okay, which is up over here. Longest road worth 2 points. All right. And that should be self-obvious, okay? And maybe a more accurate representation of this strategy would be to have this. I kind of realized as I was talking that this setup doesn't even have good access to wood and clay. All right, so it's easy to box someone in, right? You could imagine another player playing over here, and you've snaked around him, and you've really limited their options on where they can go. So that's another strength of this strategy, is that it's easier to box in other people. And then the last advantage I have, or last strength I have with this strategy, is that you're going to be less reliant on trade. Okay, what do I mean by that? If you can get a good number base like this going, now you're producing everything on your own, and you have such a big number base that you're going to generally be producing something most turns, so you don't need to trade with other players, generally speaking, okay? You're going to be able to get what you need to upgrade or get the rest of those points, all right? So those are kind of some of the strengths associated with the wood clay or expanding your numbers based strategy. Let's talk about some of the weaknesses of this strategy. Well, the effects of being boxed in yourself are going to be exacerbated with this strategy. Let's say you don't get your engine going, and for some reason you really want this wood poured down there, but some other players kind of get you in over here. If you get boxed in, it's going to be a lot harder to expand your number base because you're going to have less access to more numbers, and the numbers that you could get access to, you're going to have to spend more resources on roads in order to do that. All right. And then generally speaking, roads aren't worth any points. Yes, I know there's longest road, but roads themselves have no face value. So you're throwing a lot of resources out for something that's not getting you points. All right. Another problem with the wood clay strategy is that there's just less points available to you. Okay. What do I mean by that? Well, roads aren't worth anything on their own unless you get longest road. All right. And then you only have 5 of these settlements. Okay. So let's say everything goes right and you just get longest road and you build all 5 of your settlements. All right. That's only 7 points. Okay. You would still need 3 more points to win. And hopefully by that point in the game, you've gotten to where you can upgrade. But on their own, wood and clay aren't going to get you those last few points you need at the end of the game, unless you're able to kind of morph your strategy. Another problem with this strategy is that wood and clay tend to be less useful at the end of the game. Once people have got their road networks where they need it to be and they've got their settlements, they're going to start looking for wheat and ore to finish out their game. All right, so people are going to want clay and wood a little bit less. So you're probably going to looking at a situation where you need to trade to the bank or make lopsided trades with other players. All right. So those are some of the weaknesses that I see with this strategy. what are some areas where you can flex in between the two strategies, or what's something you can do to get those last bit of points to win a game? Well, because you're able to have some mobility on the board, you can build to areas with stone and wheat to get cities, or you might have enough to get some strong development cards going. So you'll kind of, as you expand your number base, you'll also be taking advantage of variance in the distribution. So your game will kind of morph into that variance strategy as you go along. So that's an area where you can flex. And then another way you can you can actually emulate the variance strategy by really doubling up on tiles that you have, right? So if I have 3 settlements on 8, now when that 8 is rolled, I'm producing a lot of resources, right? And that kind of mimics the or wheat strategy, and that's kind of why I put it in the section called flex areas, where it can be flexible into other strategies or be flexible to help win you the game. All right, so that is the wood clay strategy. Let me talk about the or wheat strategy, but I'm running out of film, so let me do a quick cut here and come back and finish up this video. Okay, and I'm back. All right, so let's finish this video out with the or wheat strategy, or as I call it, capitalizing on variance. Okay, let me clear some of this stuff off so I can put down some cities to really illustrate this concept, kind of like I did a minute ago. This would be a pretty decent spot for a city. And now I realize you're not going to start off with cities. That's not really the point of this. It's more or less saying that when you're doing this or wheat strategy, you're trying to upgrade to cities as quickly as possible, because the crux of this strategy is, let me move the camera a little bit. The crux of this strategy is going to be whenever a 5, 11, 3, or 8, 9, 10 are rolled, I want to be getting a lot of resources for that, or at least more resources than my opponents. All right, because that's kind of the key to this strategy, is that you're going to be getting a lot of resources, and with a lot of resources you can trade them in for something. You want to always be building, always be trading, because your production is just that high, as opposed to the wood clay strategy, which is I'm hoping to get a lot of everything, so that way the small amounts of things that I do have, I have a lot of diversity. All right, so this is more about having a lot of stuff and then trade it if you need it, and aggressively building things, even if they don't necessarily give you points right away. All right, so that's kind of the philosophy behind the or wheat strategy. All right, so and again, I just want to reiterate, the whole idea of the variance is 3s and 11s may not be rolled a lot, but when they do, I'm going to produce a lot. That's kind of what I mean by the variance, or capitalizing on the variance, I should say. All right, so what are some of the strengths of the or wheat strategy? Well, I've already said it. The idea is you're collecting more resources than the other players when the same numbers are rolled. All right, let me pull out a competing color here. To kind of illustrate this. So let's say blue is in the game, and blue is on this 3 as well. I'm getting more on a 3 than my opponent. That's one of the advantages that I'm talking about here, is collecting more resources than other players when the same numbers are rolled. Also, this one, sort of like with the roads in the other strategy, it's easier to compete for largest army, because if you're trying to collect a lot of ore and wheat, and I'm not sure if I said this a while back, but I'm hoping it's fairly self-evident. When you're doing these, you need to actually be set up on the two resources I'm talking about. So if you're doing an ore wheat strategy, you need to be set up on those tiles. And if you're doing a wood clay strategy, then you need to be on tiles for that. So just in case I didn't say it, I might have glossed over it thinking it was self-evident, but you know, that's a real problem, especially with mathematicians, that if people don't know what you're talking about, well, then it's easy for them to get confused. All right, so because you're pumping out a lot of wheat and ore, you know, just throw some sheep into the mix, and it's going to be a lot easier to compete with largest army because you're going to be getting more development cards. All right, and then going off of that whole development card line, there are more points available to you with a lot of ore and wheat than there are with wood and clay. All right, so I talked about the 2 points for largest army, but over here to the side, here are all five victory point cards that are available in the development card deck. All right, and then don't forget that the cities are worth 2 points on their own. So even if you were only able to upgrade your initial two settlements to cities, that's 4 points, okay? And let's assume you could get all but one of the victory point cards, and then you get largest army, that's 10 points, okay? So there's just more points to you because these have a face value. And I know that the development cards don't necessarily have what I would say a face value. It's kind of like the roads. Their point value is kind of conditional, but I would say that there's a higher probability of getting points through development cards than there is through roads. And not to mention, there are road building cards in the development card deck. So if no one's building a lot of roads and you get both of those road building cards, well, then you could take longest road there as well. So just in general, more points available to you with an ore and wheat strategy. All right, what else are some advantages? You're more resilient to being boxed in. And what do I mean by that? If blue were to box me in and I would only have these two settlements and it was illegal for me to, you know, go any further because there's a settlement here and a settlement here, I'm more resilient to that because I've already laid out a path to how I can win without having to build more settlements. Albeit it's a very, very low probability, but it does exist. So a little more resilience to being boxed in. Another advantage is that ore and wheat hold their value pretty consistently throughout the game, whereas wood and clay tend to be less valuable at the end. Now, I feel like this is the part of the video where I'll take a lot of flack because some players think that ore and wheat are not as good in the beginning of the game, and I have to strongly, strongly disagree with that, okay? I think what they're thinking is that early on, most people are trying to expand and build some settlements, and they're not really thinking about cities. But if you have the opportunity to upgrade to a city right away, go ahead and do it. And not to mention, there's really no bad time to just take a flyer on a development card, okay? Because if anything, you're going to have a soldier or a knight in these newer printings, and that'll even lead into another advantage, which is if you're going heavy on the development cards with your wheat and ore, then you're going to be able to have more options when it comes to the robber affecting you. All right, because you can move him around with the knight and get some payback, or just make sure it's not on your numbers when you go to roll the dice. Okay, so ore and wheat tend to hold their value throughout the game, though maybe in the meta game that you might be playing in, players tend to devalue it at the beginning, which is kind of unfortunate because I really think their value stays the same throughout the game. And I think most of you should know that wheat is the most valuable resource in the game because it's used in 3 of the 4 buildings. Okay, and you need a lot of, and you need 2 of it for a city, and then 50% of the things that you can build or buy with wheat have an initial point value. All right, and even development cards will have some value attached to it. So contrast that against wood and clay with the roads, which, yes, I know you can get longest road, but generally speaking aren't worth points. All right, so they hold their value. You have more control over the robber, which I just talked about. And another good thing is you're less reliant on trade with other players. Okay, what do I mean by that? Because you're going to be producing a lot of stuff, chances are you're going to have an easier time getting to 4 resources, or if you happen to have a port, you're going to meet those ratios a lot easier, and you're just going to be able to trade with the bank as opposed to trading with players. And if I could just give a pro tip on trading with human players, generally speaking, it is never a good idea to trade with players unless you're going to be able to build something with the resource that you get. Okay, I see a lot of players, especially new ones, just do trades because, oh, let me go ahead and trade for a clay because clay's not being rolled that often and I just kind of want to store it up. It's a bad idea. First of all, you'll trade for that clay and then it might get stolen from you by a robber later on. But chances are, if someone's trading with you, they're getting ready to build something right away. So you want to get a building of your own out of that, okay? And when I say building, I don't mean settlement. I just mean any thing that you can build off of the chart. So if they're trading, chances are they're going to build something. So you want to make sure you're building something too. All right? So strength, the last strength I have on my list is that you're less reliant on trade with other players. Let's talk about some weaknesses of this strategy, though. You're a lot easier to cripple with the robber, especially if you're not buying heavy development cards. And where did my robber pawn go? So let's say there's a situation like this. Okay, you're producing a lot of wheat, a lot of rock. Well, how easy is it to shut you down right there with that placement of the robber? Now, again, you can mitigate this because you're buying development cards, but if you have a bunch of point ones or special ones and not enough knights, well, you could be shafted there for a bit. All right, so that's one weakness. It's a lot easier to be diced, okay? So like in this setup right here that I kind of rearranged, you only have 5 different numbers plus 7. So you only have 6 different numbers. So if those numbers aren't coming up right for whatever the reason, well, you'd think with 5 and 8s, you mean you're within 2 standard deviations. Those are pretty good numbers. But, you know, it still is just a roll of the dice. And if your numbers don't come up, you're going to be a lot more susceptible to that than the diversified wood clay strategy. All right, so that's a weakness. It's harder to expand outward, and that's simply because you're focusing on wheat and rock at the exclusion of other resources, or not to the total exclusion, but you're focusing more on this. And without a good supply of clay and wood, you may find it hard to venture out. All right, out of your starting spaces or the limited spaces that you've been able to get to. You're going to be producing less often per die roll. What do I mean by that? Because you're capitalizing on the variance, you may have to wait a few dice rolls before you actually collect anything. Whereas a good wood clay strategy may be only producing 1 or 2 cards, but hopefully they're doing it pretty much every time the dice are rolled. So that's going to be the weakness, one of the weaknesses of this strategy. And then the last one is that the engine can be a little slow to get going. Because let's say these were your initial starting points, you know, whoever point of view you want to look at it through. Okay, I'm going to need 6 rock and 4 wheat in order to kind of get the engine started on this, which would be a situation like this. All right. How many turns into the game is that? I don't know. Probably 4 or 5, maybe even. I don't know. I don't know. It's going to be quite a few turns before you're going to get to here, which is where I would say the starting level of this strategy would be. All right. So it's going to be slow to get your engine going. How can you flex this strategy? Well, hopefully once you get this going and you start producing a lot, like in this setup, you roll a 5, that might as well be rolling one of anything you want. Okay, so once you start getting massive amounts of resources, you can start aggressively trading them for the wood and clay that you might need to start expanding out. And then once you've expanded out, well, now you've increased your number base, and as a bonus, you've actually increased the rewards on your variants. All right, so you've increased your lottery winnings. All right, so that's kind of how that one flexes. That one's not as flexible as the wood clay strategy, but there you go. Okay, so I think that's all the prepared notes that I have. There's one more pro tip that I want to give you guys before I sign off. I hope you found this video entertaining and enlightening. Hopefully it will increase your level of play, and if it does, definitely feel free to let me know. But one trick that I like to do a lot is, here we go, I think this is better. Let's say you have a hand, and let me kind of come over here to demonstrate that. Let's say your hand looks something like this. And this is going to be totally made up. Actually, let's swap that out. And this has nothing to do with the two strategies. I just think this is a cool trick that I've picked up throughout my mini games, and I think it's one that you might be able to use in your games. So let's say I have a hand like this, okay, and I'm really wanting to build a city. All right. Well, what's the problem? Well, I'm missing a wheat that I need. Maybe I do something like this. Hey, would anyone trade a wood for a wheat? And then, like I've said, wheat is the most valuable valuable resource in the game. Maybe it's getting later in the game, and people are just like, no, wood's kind of worthless to me. I don't want a wheat. But sheep are kind of considered the worst resource in the game. So maybe what you could do is you can say, well, I've got these 3 sheep. Maybe what I'll do is I'll trade, hey, will you want to have wood for sheep? And then, that's the classic settlers joke, so everyone laughs. But let's say someone will do that because they need to build a road. Maybe they're fighting over longest road or whatever, but they decide to trade you. Now look what you have. You now have 4 sheep, so you trade these in for the 1 wheat you needed, and then you go ahead and build your city. All right, so that's kind of a way around trade embargoes, I'm going to call them, or when someone's being a stubborn trader and you really need that 1 extra resource. I don't know, it's a really highly situational tip, but I don't see a lot of players do it, and I've actually won a couple of games doing some stuff like that, and I wanted to impart it on to you guys. So I guess that's about it. Hopefully I don't get murdered too much in the comments on how I've got everything wrong and all that, but I enjoy doing this review, this strategy discussion. This is one of my favorite games of all time, and I hope that you guys like it. I know it can kind of be in vogue to hate on settlers, but it's okay. I still love it. It's a great game. Appreciate you watching. Thank you.